Rain settled over the prairie like a long, exhausted sigh, soft enough to be mistaken for silence until it touched the tin roof of the old barn. Each drop landed with the patience of someone who had waited years just to be heard. Inside, the air was cold enough that breath drifted in faint clouds, disappearing before it could become anything more permanent. Naira Willow slept curled on a bed of hay that smelled of dust and old seasons, wrapped in the thin white shawl she had been given on her wedding day, more simple than comfort. The fabric was torn at the edge, a single thread clinging like it feared being separated completely. She did not wake suddenly, but with the slow instinct of someone who had learned to rise without being noticed. Her eyes opened to the familiar sight of wooden beams overhead, darkened by rainwater leaks and years of neglect. For a moment, she pretended she belonged here, that the world outside the barn walls had not spoken of her in hushed tones, that the ground beneath her was a bed chosen rather than the only place left. But the truth returned the way pain often does, quietly, without mercy. The memory of last night drifted in, voices at the ranch house, someone saying she was no longer their problem, the sound of a door closing not because she left, but because she was released. She sat up slowly, pressing her palms into the hay, feeling its coarse sting. Her black hair fell loose around her shoulders, tangled from sleep, and she gathered it with the practiced grace of someone who had stopped expecting gentleness from the world. Through the narrow slats of the barn wall, she could see the yard beyond, mud spreading like spilled ink, a bucket overturned, the gray outline of morning too pale to be trusted. A place meant for livestock, now sheltering a bride without a home. Naira listened to the rain the way others listened to voices. It told her that the world would stay quiet today, that the town would take longer to wake, that eyes would not find her yet. But she knew what waited when the sky cleared. The women at the well would pause their hands. The men at the trading post would talk just loud enough. No one needed to say her name. Her presence alone had become a sentence. She stood, smoothing the shawl even though it would not look any more whole. Her bare feet pressed into the dirt floor, cold rising through her bones. A horse shifted in the next stall, shaking droplets from its mane. She whispered a soft greeting in her mother's language, a habit that made her feel less erased. The horse lowered its head in response, as if acknowledging that two abandoned things were sharing the same roof. Just as she reached for the barn door, footsteps approached, steady, unhurried, not the kind that came searching for trouble. The latch clicked before she could pull back. She froze, breath caught in her throat, body bracing for the familiar sting of being told to leave. But the door did not swing open with force. It eased back slowly, as though the person on the other side understood that fear responds differently to gentleness. Silas Crow stood in the doorway, rain running down the shoulders of his coat, dark hair pushed back from his face. He was tall in a way that made the entrance seem smaller, yet nothing about him carried the weight of someone trying to fill space. His eyes scanned the barn, not to judge, but to understand, and finally settled on her. He didn't step forward. He didn't announce his purpose. He simply existed there, quiet as the morning. Naira straightened her posture, though her hands tightened around the shawl. She had seen him only once before, at a distance in town, leading a chestnut mare, speaking softly to the animal as if the two were old friends. People said he traded horses and avoided trouble, not out of fear, but out of choice. They said he lived on the edge of town, closer to the Pine Ridge than the saloon. They also said he carried a scar under his jaw, the kind that comes from surviving something without ever telling the story. He studied her for one long moment, not like she was a problem to solve, but like he was making sure she knew he saw her. His voice, when it came, was low and even, as if volume could break something fragile. "Get your things and come with me." The words were simple, but they struck harder than any order she had received. She blinked, unsure whether she heard him correctly. People did not offer her choices. They did not ask her to go anywhere except away. She waited for the second half of the sentence, the explanation, the condition, the price, but he did not add anything. He stood still, letting the rain speak in his silence. Naira felt heat rise in her chest, not anger, but disbelief. "I have no things," she whispered. her voice barely more than air. Silas nodded once, as if he expected that answer. Then just come. She took a step back, shaking her head. Leaving meant trusting someone. Leaving meant risking being abandoned twice. Shame had a way of convincing her that staying unseen was safer than being noticed. The barn might have been cold and unwelcoming, but at least it did not pretend to care. "You don't know what they said about me," she murmured. "I heard enough to know it wasn't your voice saying it." The reply landed like warmth spreading through frost. No defense, no curiosity, just quiet truth. For the first time in days, she felt her throat tighten, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to relief. Outside, the rain grew louder, turning the yard into ripples and shallow pools. Silas waited without shifting his weight, the patience of someone who understood that choice cannot be forced. He did not reach for her. He did not offer his hand. He gave her space, and space itself became the kindness she had been denied. Naira looked around the barn one last time. The empty stalls, the forgotten tools, the place where loneliness had shaped itself into a room. She wrapped the shawl tighter and stepped forward, though her legs trembled. When she reached him, she paused at the threshold. The world beyond smelled of wet earth and pine, sharp and alive. The wind lifted her hair, and for a moment she felt the old version of herself loosen like a knot. Silas turned slightly, enough for her to walk beside him rather than behind. They crossed the yard in silence, their footsteps sinking into mud. The town was just beginning to stir, windows glowing faintly, doors opening a crack. Faces appeared, watching through glass and gaps in curtains. The whispers didn't reach her ears, but she felt them all the same, crawling across her skin like cold rain. She expected Silas to slow, to adjust his pace out of caution, but he moved steadily forward, not shielding her and not distancing himself. His presence was not protection, it was acceptance. The sheriff stood on the porch of the general store, arms folded, eyes following them. For a heartbeat, Naira thought Silas might turn back. He didn't. The sheriff looked away first. By the time they reached the road leading out of town, the rain had softened into mist. Naira's shawl clung to her shoulders, heavy but no longer cold. Her lungs filled with air that tasted like pine instead of dust. Silas spoke only once more as they walked. "You're not being taken," he said. "You're being welcomed. There's a difference." The words didn't erase her past, but they loosened the weight of it. Ahead, the path curved toward a cabin she had never seen, a place with no promises, yet no threats. She did not know what waited there or how long this fragile peace would last, but she kept walking. When they reached his porch, Silas opened the door and stepped aside, letting her choose whether to enter. Naira crossed the threshold slowly, feeling the warmth of the fire before she saw it. The room was small but clean. One table, one chair, a kettle steaming softly. He didn't ask questions. He didn't expect gratitude. He set a cup of warm water on the table and said, "You can stay because you choose to." For the first time since her world unraveled, her breath didn't break on the way out. She sat down, hands wrapped around the cup, letting the heat move through her like a forgotten language. Outside, the rain eased into stillness, as if the sky had finally exhaled. And though nothing had been promised, something quiet and irreversible had begun.